The same meter reader who found those remains just 7 days ago called deputies back in August, not once, not twice, but 3 times, trying to tip off investigators. Major bombshell. Good evening. I'm Bob Fryer.
And I'm Jacqueline London. That's not the only breaking development. Mike DeForce is at that search scene right now. Mike, we've also learned a deputy actually cleared that scene back in August, arriving at 4:30 and clearing it by 5 o'clock.
Unbelievable developments in this case, Jackie. The same meter reader who located that body last week was actually out here exactly 4 months ago. Looks off to the side of the road, actually sees a plastic bag, we believe, off in the woods. Contacts authorities 3 different times on 3 separate days. On the 3rd day, August 13th, the one sheriff's deputy responded out here, spent about 30 minutes in the area, cleared the scene, and at that point, no one ever thought to go back in these woods again, apparently, until this exact same meter reader must, on a hunch, for whatever reason, was back out here last week, went to approximately the same spot, they believe, and that's when he stumbled on this still unidentified child. Here's what sheriff's officials had to say just a few moments ago.
Back in August, he made a phone call, reported a bag on the side of the road, which he then continued on with his duties. A deputy responded to the scene, did not locate anything, and cleared the area. That's that call back on August 11th.
And right now, sheriff's investigators are trying to get to the bottom of this. Why was this report apparently not forwarded up the chain of command? Why was a body not found out here if this was, in fact, the same one? And that is something big they're also trying to get to the bottom. This bag that the utility worker reported 4 months ago, was it the same bag containing these skeletal remains that they are now out here 1 week later trying to recover and piece back together? So a lot of unanswered questions, but the sheriff's office is trying to make it very clear at this point they have no suspicions of this utility worker. In fact, one official said, thank goodness he came back out here again last week. He came to the same spot, found that bag, and made that 911 call that possibly made a big crack in this case. I am now going to pass this over to my colleague Jessica D'Onofrio, who I understand has some even new information about this.
Well, Mike, you pretty much covered it pretty well. What I was able to find out is back on August 11th, a female deputy responded out to the scene. She responded to a report of a gray bag in a swamp area. That again, on August 11th, I should say, female deputy responded to the scene out here, and you can see that investigators are still on the scene tonight. Now, she arrived, she looked around, and quickly closed the scene and left. And of course, now we know there were more phone calls coming in from that meter reader in the days following that, on August 12th, on August 13th. The question here is, there are more deputies possibly involved in responding out to this, and how are they being investigated at this point in time? But again, a female deputy responded to the scene on August 11th. We are unclear on what her name is at this point. All of this is still under investigation, but we can only assume that we can pull all of the public records for that day here at this address and find those calls for service, and there should be a 911 call attached to all of this. So a lot more information is going to be coming in the very near future. Back to you.
Jessica, thank you. So many breaking developments in this case just within the last half hour here.
Yeah, and this new information, obviously, no doubt, going to be playing right into Casey Anthony's defense. All they need is that reasonable doubt to clear their client. Investigative reporter Tony Pipitone joining us now, talking about how they are preparing to challenge the evidence that is found out there at that scene. And all they have to do, Tony, is to say this area, the search, the scene, has been compromised in some way. And you said it yourself, they'll also bring up the word botched.
That is clearly where this is going to be headed, that they'll say the sheriff's office has botched this investigation. We talked to someone from the Baez law firm. We'll have a statement from them in just a moment. We also talked to a prominent defense attorney in town to ask him about what this means for the case. And clearly, when you put this in a timeline, someone drives by this road on August 11th and sees a bag on the side of the road. Well, Kaylee was last seen alive on June 16th. So are you going to try to persuade a jury that this bag had been there for up to 2 months and no one saw it until August 11th? Or are you going to suggest that perhaps someone put the body there close to August 11th? And of course, it was July 16th when Casey was arrested and she was in jail. So it really puts a lot of questions over the scene, a lot of questions, as Bob said, that will be used to raise reasonable doubt. Here's the defense attorney Cheney Mason said when I put it to him.
The sheriff's department really has some explaining to do, because imagine, look, this guy or any other person that called in on the 11th and said to them, listen, I've just been there in this area and I've seen this bag and I've seen this child's skull, and it caused the world to focus its lenses on that wood immediately and still there. How in the world can they explain not having done that when a guy called 3 days in a row?
4 months earlier when that call was made. For 4 months, no one found those remains out in those woods, despite the calls that were made by that meter reader. That's the kind of thing where defense attorneys will say, well, who did this meter reader tell that he saw something in there? Who else has he told? And then who have they told? And exponentially, it could build out to where this investigation could go in all sorts of directions. Now, the Baez law firm tells us this is a perfect example of why the media and the public should not be prejudging this case, that law enforcement has been and continues to withhold vital information that could clear Casey Anthony. This coming from the Baez law firm just minutes ago. Casey Anthony deserves the presumption of innocence until all the information and all the facts are brought forward, is what they're saying.
Tony, I want to say that the other thing that bolsters the suspicion of this, finding the bag back in July or back in August and then again back in December, this is a heavily trafficked area. We're hearing more and more that the kids in that area used to go back, that we heard from one of Casey Anthony's friends, they used to go back and bury their pets that passed away.
Yeah, and the kids would hang out in the woods back there. Sure. So you wonder who else could have seen this. Of course, there was water. We did have Faye come through in August, and there was a period of time here where perhaps that was inaccessible and no one could have seen anything. And today you learned that more remains are being found there on the outer edges of that grid search, which one source told me suggests that perhaps the water rose and carried the remains when it receded down by gravity down to the lower point of that area, because they said the remains are all going in the same direction. You wouldn't expect maybe animals to do it that way, but perhaps gravity would.
But again, the area heavily trafficked. The time, the 11th, 12th, and 13th of August, Faye didn't hit until the 18th or 19th.
Oh, sure. I mean, we know that it's a wet area, but if this guy saw something there, why didn't the deputy on the 11th? Why didn't the deputy on the 13th, who when he called again? It's just amazing questions being asked tonight by the defense.
Hard to believe, right, that if the utility worker called August 11th and saw something suspicious, definitely suspicious if it was a bag 4 months ago that contained skeletal remains that hadn't decomposed at all.
Exactly.
It had just been 2 months since little Kaylee had disappeared.
Yeah.
How did a deputy who went out to that scene not see that bag, and how was he able to clear it within 30 minutes?
Those are questions that the sheriff's office is investigating right now with an internal investigation. They said one deputy is being looked at, but based on what Jessica D'Onofrio was saying, I wouldn't be surprised if they're also looking at that first deputy who went out there on that Monday, the 11th.
One other thing we should also mention, the sheriff's department is standing by this utility worker right now, but obviously there is some suspicion here about what is this person's motivation to not only be the 11th, 12th, and 13th. Perhaps they were conducting their own investigation, but then again to wind up out there in December, and then to come up with a story that they went into the woods to relieve themselves. Whether or not that's true, it seems suspicious that.
But they make clear he is not a suspect in their minds.
Yes.
Of course, the defense might have some other things that they're considering.
They say he was just a concerned citizen, and he hadn't heard anything in the news, so he just went out 4 months later, following up on his own tip to see if there was anything out there, and then made that discovery again.
And either way, credited with finding the remains of a child, one way or another. Whether or not it's Kaylee Anthony or not, credited with finding those remains. So we should say that.
Tony, thank you.
Right. Now, Tony, thank you. That search scene is really the focus of a lot of the questions as we're talking about at this point. Where did that meter reader see the bag in the first place in August? Was it in the road? Was it in the woods? We do know that this week's discovery was several feet into the woods. Now, we're hearing now that meter reader's voice, his voice, when he called his own dispatch center last week. Adam Longo joining us live now. For the first time, we're going to hear his voice on that 911 call, Adam.
Yeah, that's right. Yet another exclusive, Bob, broken right here on Local 6. What we have here is the 911 tape that we heard initially last Friday. That was from the Orange County Utility Dispatch Center to the Orange County Sheriff's Office Dispatch Center. We have yet to hear from that meter reader. What you're about to hear is that meter reader calling his dispatch center, informing them of what he found. It's about a minute long. A lot of it has to do with trying to find this location. But have a listen right now.